Hanukkah Sameach and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So happy to be with you again for Sipurei Reshit, this wonderful series of conversations between local rabbis in Orange County. I'm Rabbi Marcia Tilchin, the founder of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. And I'm thrilled to be here with my colleagues, Rabbi Nico Socolovsky and David Young. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Shalom, shalom everyone. I'm Rabbi Nico Socolovsky from Temple Beth Tikvah in Fullerton. It's once again a pleasure to be sharing this space of conversation, discussion, and learning. How are you doing, David?
I am Rabbi David N. Young from Congregation B'nai Tzedek in Fountain Valley. And I believe this week, instead of calling it Sipurei Reshit, Rabbi Nico and I are calling it Discussing the Parsha with Rabbi Marcia.
Yes. Yeah. In the screen, she's on top of us. So they say she's our leader this week. So Rabbi Marcia, it's Hanukkah. Do you want to share anything about Hanukkah as we start this conversation?
Well, there's so much to say. First of all, this is, been a mellow Hanukkah for me personally. I think on the heels of Thanksgiving, there was just a lot going on, and it's sort of just as America ties in so many ways ties into the Parsha, just as America is beginning to truly rev up towards the season of tidings and joy. We already had to dive in, right after we sort of finished our holiday weekend. And I'll say it made me start to think a lot about the character of Joseph, who we spent a lot of time with last week in last week's Parsha, and of course in Miketz this week. It's such a colorful narrative in the Torah, so much so that a very famous musical was created around it. And I
call this period 3 weeks of Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yeah, exactly. And I would love to sort of explore with you as part of our conversation today, the character of Joseph. Is he an Egyptian? Is he an Israelite? Discuss. Just like, are we American? Are we Jewish, etc.?
So if I would love to start by just contextualizing Joseph's story at this point in Parashat Miketz in the book of Genesis. He's one of 13 siblings. We count 12 tribes, but there was a sister there, and she's not counted as one of the siblings most of the time. So,
May I interrupt for just a second? Excuse me. There may be more sisters.
There might be more.
The science of genetics would suggest that there are more sisters, but it's only the sisters who have a narrative of interest to the writers that we hear about. So there are probably some hidden siblings that we're unaware of.
Exactly.
As the Torah on top of the Torah, right? Like the interpretation of interpretation. And it's right. And that's how we read Torah, right? So we know at least of 13 siblings. He's one of at least 13 siblings. And he's a very special character. He's a young man, and he starts having dreamings. And in these dreams, he sees all kinds of situations that he decides to share with his brothers, and his brothers don't take that so well, because in these dreams he saw himself as we could say as superior to them, and this creates a family strife, and he ends up being sold to a group of nomads, and he ends up later on in Egypt working for Potiphar. He's subject of sexual harassment, and he's accused of sexual harassment, and now he's a prisoner. He's in jail. He's in a dungeon once again. He was thrown into a dungeon by his siblings, and now he's in a dungeon because he's in jail. And that's how Parashat Miketz starts. He's in this jail situation, and we learn that Pharaoh is having dreams. And Pharaoh hears about this young man who knows how to interpret dreams.
That's right.
Another interesting thing about the Joseph narrative is that he is both hoisted on his own petard, and it's that petard that ends up getting him out of the situation that he finds himself in, because it's dream interpretation that gets him in trouble in the first place, because he's, what you said, that he says some nasty things to his brothers. He's bragging about his dreams, and then it's interpreting Pharaoh's dreams that, sorry, spoiler alert, you ended in jail, but it's interpreting Pharaoh's dreams that gets him out of jail. So he's got all these like parallels,
which I think really speaks to the complete duality of his nature, meaning all of his downfalls end up being his the gifts that sort of lead him to great success. The fact that he's gorgeous, as a young man, and yet is completely unrecognizable to his brothers later on in life. Everything about Joseph is this and this at the same time. And I think that is, to me, actually one of the challenges for all of us of being who we are in a different society. And, and I know, David, you said something really interesting about comparing Joseph and Moses when we were talking a little bit before. And I'd love for you to sort of talk about how they're almost like polar opposites.
Sure. One of the things that I brought up while you were talking about Joseph's, I'm actually going to take a step back. One of my teachers in New York in rabbinical school, Rabbi Dr. Leonard Kravitz, who refers to himself sometimes as the other Lenny Kravitz, would joke with us that he walks like this because he straddles two worlds, and he meant as an American and as a Jewish person. But I think like him saying that chorus of straddling two worlds is regularly ringing in my brain when I study Torah, because so many of our characters are straddling two worlds. And I think there's a deep reason for that we can probably get to towards the end. But Joseph starts out as an Israelite and becomes an Egyptian, and as you said, unrecognizable to his brothers, which is kind of comes up at the end of this week's parasha. And Moses goes the other way. Moses starts life as an Egyptian. He's raised in the Pharaoh's household, and then he becomes / realizes he is an Israelite. And they're both like, neither one of them could have done it any other way. I suppose Joseph could have gone any other way if it weren't for that random angel in the field from last week's parasha, where there's this, Joseph goes to chase his brothers down, and he sees this Ish in the field, and he's like, hey, where are my brothers? And the Ish goes, they went that way. And there's no reason for him to take a left turn at Albuquerque, but he does, and it's all because of the angel, and so it could have gone the other way. But anyway, Joseph is the perfect person for the job, because he's on this roller coaster from favored child to slave to vizier.
By the way, I just wanted to say, it's interesting. I've never thought about the Ish and the cupbearer as similar figures, but we just like, there's this sort of random guy in jail, and without him going, oh yeah, there was this dude that I knew, nothing, history would not have unfolded. And which I just think, we all have people in our lives who are, it might have been a happenstance meeting on a bus, on an airplane, whatever, who will say something to us that is, you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about this before. And those people are like that for him. We all have them. Nico, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things I think are very interesting. And first, going in the direction that you were discussing, this idea of Joseph being between two walls, it reminds me of the sugya in the Talmud of Rabbi Yirmiyahu. There's a discussion about a pigeon. If he falls in, it falls in one side of the fence or in the other side of the fence. Who does that pigeon belong to? So the rabbis go back and forth, and at some point, Rabbi Yirmiyahu says, "What happens if he falls with one leg on one side of the fence and with the other one on the other side of the fence?" And Talmud says that because of that, he was thrown out from the house of study.
Ah.
And the story is actually about the lack of ability of the rabbis to deal with individuals that have one leg on one side of the fence and the other leg on the other side of the fence. Now, Joseph is a difficult figure for his siblings exactly because of that. He's in two walls, and he's a difficult figure all the time, everywhere, because of that. And we will see that later on, he becomes a more acceptable figure because he starts to tell his story and to present himself differently. He becomes self-aware, and so he shares his narrative in a very different way because he knows that most people have no ability to process him. Now, I think there's a story here. It happens in the next Torah portion of self-awareness. Now, another component in this story is that Joseph is, by definition, not recognized. Like, his siblings don't recognize him when they know him. And later on in this Torah portion, when they come to ask for food in Egypt and he's in a position of power, once again, they don't recognize him. And he changes the story, and he will change it in the next Torah portion, but making himself visible. He understands that his siblings have no ability to see him. And therefore, the work is on him. He creates peace with his siblings by making himself visible. Now, if he didn't do that, they would be never able to create peace, because when you don't recognize each other, when we don't recognize each other, we can live together in peace.
Okay, I just want to say though, how would you then, I'd love to know what both of you think about this. The fact is, he does make his brothers jump through some hoops. You know, he may be self-actualized from his years in Egypt and have come to terms with the fact that he was sent there for a reason, which he says, ultimately says, look, you know, God wanted this the whole
Extra portion.
But the truth is, like, how would you talk? I mean, that's what this parsha is all about. Is first he sends him back with a ton of food, and he says, and don't come back unless your whole family comes. Like, first of all, what are the other brothers thinking? Like, are they thinking like he must know? Like, does any one of the other 11 men have or it's not 11 because it's 10 because Benjamin's at home, like thinking, how does this guy know so much about us? I'm just sort of like.
Well, the Pharaoh was a god in their culture, so maybe they were a little worried that they're angering this other god who knows so much about them, and then the vizier is a representative of this god.
And maybe like a thing following on your question, maybe and thinking about Joseph Powers not as a god but as a mindful human. Is that what we will see in the next Torah portion is Joseph's ability to retell the story and to fix a memory in order to be able to create a present and a future.
Beautiful.
And to create that peace, right?
Yep.
But now he's processing. At this time, he's processing. Now, Rabbi David Foreman, he asks, why he didn't write home? Like why Joseph never wrote a letter to Jacob saying, Dad, I'm fine.
Right.
Like, and the story from Joseph's perspective is a very different one. He was sent to Shechem from all places by Jacob. After all this, he was in strife with his brothers, and Jacob sends him to Shechem from all places. Shechem, where like his siblings killed everyone just a Torah portion ago, and now he says in any, like Abraham said when he was going to sacrifice, in his perception, his own son, and so from Joseph's perspective, nobody cares about him. He doesn't know that his dad thinks that he has died.
Oh.
So, and I think that's the interesting things about understanding that sometimes we just have only one piece of the narrative. And I think that Joseph, at this point, at the end of this Torah portion, is overwhelmed with kindness and with the need to forgive and to come to terms with his family. He missed them desperately. And he's trying to figure out more about the story because he's starting to understand that he might not have the full narrative. And he ends up creating a narrative.
But think about it too in our own lives. Sometimes when we walk away from anything, it doesn't matter what it was, where we were born, whatever, and we start a new life somewhere else, it really is easy to close a door. Yeah, I think about the play, close every door to me, it's easy to close a door and just, redefine yourself, reinvent yourself. But when that door gets open, and inevitably for a lot of people it does, you hear about a death or something, your history comes back to completely inform who you are. David, I'd love to, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And also, we haven't talked about the character of Jacob at all, who I just want to throttle. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but I just think he's a terrible father in every way. And I'd love to know your thoughts on him as well.
Wow. And my mind was going to other places, but happy to discuss. Yes, Jake.
I'm curious. Wait, before you go into that, where you were? Where did you go?
I was thinking about the narrative that Joseph creates in closing the doors, that he's closing the doors behind him. There's this amazing moment next week in Vayigash where when Joseph reveals who he is to his brothers, and he does it with just a few words. He says, Ani Yosef ha'od avichai. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? And I'm getting my allergies are acting up just thinking of that line, because the power of that, I've known who you are. I've been listening to your conversation in Hebrew because I speak both languages, and so by saying Ani Yosef, that's all they need to know. But he only has one thing he needs to know: is my father still alive? And there's that, so to bring it back to Marcia's question. Sorry, Nico, just give me 1 second. To bring it back to Marcia's question about how is Jacob as a father? All three of our ancestral avot who we mention in prayer are terrible fathers, and for various reasons. But the idea of favoring a kid, that's blatantly favoring a kid. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Joseph gets this beautiful, expensive $1,000 coat, and the rest of you get $10 gift cards to Starbucks. It's horrible. But no matter how bad a father, either Joseph doesn't recognize it because he was the spoiled one, or because it doesn't matter, because we love our fathers.
Or because he was 17 years old and he was a teenager, and they're clueless.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And it takes some time to what?
Special message to my son: 17 years old equals clueless. Love you.
No, but I think, Just one comment on the side to that, and I want to get back to that moment in the next Torah portion. I think that when we see our parents in the Torah and Joseph, and they're human beings, man. Like, they're just human beings. And like, if you take some snapshots of, my parenting, I'm not sure that I'm happy with every single one of those snapshots that we could take out of my parenthood. I know that my motivation, my driving force is a very loving one, a very caring one. It comes out like in the best way. And I think that the Torah is sharing that. So that's one thing. And I think that we need to be, actually, the fact that we have parental figures in the Torah that are challenging is for us to realize that being a parent is not about perfection, it's about sticking to the journey and trying your best at every single time. And I want to say something about that moment that you just described, the moment in which he says, I'm Joseph. I think that in that moment, he's not making himself known to his brothers. He's finally understanding that he's Joseph.
Ooh, you're going to make me cry again.
So it's not a moment of revelation toward the outside. It's an internal one. He says, what is that? So, I'm Joseph.
And
what I care is about that. Where is that? And one of the things that happened to him also, in terms of, and going back to the initial question that Marcia asked, is that, he was taken out of a dungeon by Pharaoh. He was put in a dungeon by his brothers. He was stripped of his clothes by his siblings, and he's given new clothes by Pharaoh, a wife, and a new man, a new name. So he, to some extent, is Pharaoh's child now. And in that moment is, is saying, yes, I am, but I'm Joseph. I am Joseph. And he's saying that to himself. And he's saying, what is that? What is that?
And Nico, when he says, is my father still alive? It's not, I don't even think it's about, we come from our fathers. That's a metaphor for, is the family of my origin still intact? Do I still have my roots? I think that question is as much about himself as I am Joseph, which I think is a brilliant insight. And also some of the things that the two of you shared with me today, which is really exquisite, how this Pharaoh really elevated and adopted Joseph with willingness. Maybe there was an ulterior motive because he was going to make him rich or whatever. But the point is, it was genuine in the moment. Whereas Moses was also the son of Pharaoh, but not by Pharaoh's own design, by Pharaoh's daughter's design. And again, the parallels, I hope at some point, if we continue these into Exodus, it would be a fascinating conversation to really just look at the mirror image of Joseph and Moses, one to the other.
I give you a spoiler. We are talking about that. We might be coming with stories of our people. We'll get the confirmation. So we'll get the confirmation in the next couple of days.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for watching.
So and maybe with that, we need to start to conclude our conversation. But I want to say something about Hanukkah. You said you want to make the connection between Hanukkah and Miketz. I do. I want to say something about Hanukkah in the context of Joseph, Miketz, and the light of the Hanukkah. One of the things that we know about Hanukkah, and Rabbi Tilchin has a Hanukkah behind her, is that, and the reason you can have it during daytime is because the light of the Hanukkah is not supposed to help us see what is outside. That's why we light the shamash. Now, we use the shamash to light the other candles, but the real reason we have a shamash is because if for some reason all of a sudden we don't have light, we can't use the light of the Hanukkah candles to see. And so therefore, we always need to have another light. That's why we have the shamash.
Right.
So the light of the Hanukkah candles are meant for us to see not the outside world, but they are supposed to be a reflection of what we are seeing in our inside world. And I think that Joseph, during his time in jail, his time in the dungeon, in obscurity, was able to see the light within himself. And with that light, he comes out and he's eventually able to keep walking his journey and his life. And I think that Hanukkah is a time in which we are called to recognize the light, not that we see outside, but the light that we see within ourselves. And from that place come with appreciation and gratitude, and to rededicate ourselves to a life in which we are seekers of miracles. We don't ask for miracles. We recognize the miracles that we have within ourselves.
Exactly. And to add on top of that, it not only is a way for us to look inside and recognize our own miracles, but the Chanukiah is a way to serve as a beacon for others to look in and see the miracles we're creating, because we only know very few things about Hanukkah from the Talmud itself. From culture and learning, we know more, but the Talmud only tells us a couple of things. And one of them is put the Chanukiah where everyone can see it, put it in the window, let it serve as a demonstration that we're all celebrating the miracles within us.
And I would just say last, I think the light of the Chanukiah is, best expressed at the end of the Haftarah. We'll chant in shul tomorrow, Lo v'chayil v'lo v'choach ki im beruchi, not by the sword and not by might, but by my spirit, says the Lord, that the true strength and the true miracles that daily attend us, as we say in our Amidah 3 times a day, is really the spiritual strength that light represents, that we have to keep, lighting our candle in the dark, even during the darkest times. And so the power is not in gravitas, but it's really in our spiritual fortitude. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so happy I got to be with the two of you today. As tonight begins the Rosh Chodesh Tevet. Today's the 29th of Kislev. Tomorrow's the 30th of Kislev. I want to wish you all a Chodesh Tov and a happy 5th day of Hanukkah and a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll continue to watch these wonderful conversations as they unfold next week and the week after, etc. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom Mevorach.
Shabbat Shalom, Chagorim Sameach.